All right, and we're live. Craig Marker, good to see you again. Welcome back to the show.
Wonderful to be back. I've missed you. It's great seeing all the work you're doing. So thank you for having me back.
100%. Always grateful to be able to share the space with you and hear all the work that you're doing. So this is our trilogy episode right now.
Oh, excellent. Awesome. That's
As
hopefully the third one makes up for the second one and first one. I don't know, but yep.
the trilogy, anything can happen in the third one right here. So
Hmm.
we'll definitely let it rip. But no, I've chatted a lot about specific different things over the years with training, when you turned 50, the work that you were doing there, but then all the work that you've done from your academic work and now, the work that you're doing now at Georgia State. I wanted to start and kick this off chatting about longevity. I think this is a topic that's seems like it's been gaining a lot more traction about talking about longevity, maybe over the past year to 18 months or so. Have you seen like a spark in the research and more of this topic being more popular nowadays?
Most definitely. I think, there were, early 2000s, there were a few researchers looking at like sort of healthy aging and sort of, centenarians or even, before that centenarians, but, just trying to figure out what factors lead to, centenarians and sort of healthy aging. But then there's, the term longevity got kind of put into this and just more and more research on this topic of longevity and, how to achieve it. One of the difficult things is studying it because you can study it in animal models, but in humans, it's really difficult to study. We can do a lot of correlational type studies, but we don't know if what we're doing at age 50, just following somebody for 40, 50 years could be really difficult. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we don't know if what we're doing, we don't know the measures so much what to look at. So we can measure sort of indirect links to longevity, but the actual longevity piece is hard to measure.
This episode is brought to you by Paluva. Paluva is a new zero-drop minimalist shoe with a distinctive five-toe design. Paluvas give you the most authentic barefoot style experience, but with sufficient cushioning to use for all manner of everyday movement, fitness, and athletics. I've been using these new shoes in both strength training and my daily walks, and I have to tell you, they are by far the best minimalist shoe that I've come across. The popularity of minimalist shoes have been on a big upswing, but Paluvas are a step ahead of every other zero-drop wide box shoe because of the critical feature of individual five-toe articulation, a separate slot for each of your toes. This allows for correct dynamic movement of the foot through walking or running, which is impossible when toes are encased in a single box. Now, minimalist shoes have faced controversy in recent years about causing injury from inappropriate use. So the big picture mission is start walking and living in Paluvas as often as possible. Use your specialized running shoes, basketball shoes, work boots, or high heels when you need to, but wear Paluvas as much as possible to reawaken the natural functionality of the human foot to stand, walk, run, and perform. And Paluvas also have a sleek, cool design, so you get a barefoot shoe that looks great as well as feels great. And now you can try a pair of Paluvas with no risk and realize that these are the most comfortable shoes you've ever worn. They are literally designed to feel like you're walking barefoot on a putting green. So you can go visit paluva.com and use a code SC15 for a 15% discount off your first pair. That's SC15 at checkout. Thank you very much. Let's get to the show.
Yeah. Why is it so much more difficult to like look at studies of longevity and what works? Is it just because over such a long period of time, there's so many different factors that might go into what is health, or is it kind of different protocols? There's just not a lot of research on it. Like, why is it more difficult maybe than some other things to research for health?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with it's a multivariate problem, and so anytime you've got, you know, two variables, even like those two variables can interact. For some people, this interaction can, lead to a bigger benefit. Some people it actually leads to so let's say a genetic, one gene affects how, you digest something, for example. For one person, it digests just fine. For another person, it doesn't digest well. And so these interactions, there's so many of them. And when we talk about longevity, we're talking about, there's a model of the factors of aging, and they keep adding more and more factors to it. So, thinking about all of the variables involved with it, it's just so complex and how they can all interact with each other. There's a lot of overlap, but for one person, you hear about those stories about the centenarians who smoke.
Mhm.
Is it the smoking that's keeping them alive, or is it that they had a genetic interaction that, kind of, smoking was mitigated and,
Right.
didn't seem to bother them. So
Yeah.
just so many different factors. And, we can look at what they're doing, but doesn't mean that works for each individual.
Yeah, it's probably so hard too to differentiate the anecdotal evidence of what works for one person versus is another. I always think to my grandmother who was a huge smoker and lived till 90, and it's like, quality of life, that's certainly subjective in many different ways, but in regards to like physical, I guess first actually to start with, what would be the definition that you would use for training for longevity? Like what is the actual definition that we're looking at?
I mean, I'm looking like I honestly don't know what's going to make me, I think we talk about lifespan and health span. So, I'm sure you're familiar with those terms, but like, lifespan is how long you live, health span's how long you live in sort of a healthy way where you can still function quite well. And I'm really aiming for health span. And I'm thinking about, those factors that I want to do when I'm older. So, kind of anything that, and I don't even know what's affecting my mitochondria, but what I think are affecting my mitochondria to make my mitochondria healthy is probably helping me, ward off dementia type issues. It's helping me with my endurance now. It's probably helping me, kind of avoid sort of a lot of other health factors, heart disease, maybe even some cancers, diabetes, and other things. So, like when I think about like the things that I'm doing, I'm trying to look at mechanisms that I know affect things that can reduce lifespan or health span. So, when I think about training for longevity, I'm just trying to enhance the mechanisms that ward off disease and, shorter lifespan.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember Pavel was the first one who, put the attention in my mind of mitochondrial health. And he's like, if there is anything that's going to help us increase our health span as well as our lifespan, it's going to be mitochondrial health and going into the chemistry behind that. But so with the research that you've done and the work that you've seen, what are the optimal things that we want to look at or like the longest levers for training for longevity?
Yeah, and maybe I can kind of point out something that I see a lot in the literature, and then I'll kind of give you my ideas later. But like, so right now, kind of seeing this, sort of reverberation of this idea of VO2 max. So VO2 max is, how well we utilize oxygen, how much oxygen our muscles can actually use. It's something that we can measure relatively easily. It's not like a muscle biopsy where we're measuring, type 1, type 2 fibers or, density of mitochondria. Those are much more difficult to get. Anybody can go in and get a VO2 max test. They have some expense to them, but, a treadmill and, kind of an expensive machine, and you can do that. Even watches sort of give you an estimate of VO2 max.
Mhm.
In research, it's been shown that people with higher VO2 max live longer. So, I think what I've seen, and I don't know is the correct interpretation, is if we train for a higher VO2 max, we'll live longer. And I think that correlation, I'm not sure it exactly exists. I think
Mhm.
because we can measure it easily doesn't mean it's our optimal outcome. And let me give another example, and then I'll kind of go back to VO2 max. Like grip strength is another indicator of mortality. So when people's grip strength goes down, they tend not to live much longer. So I see popular press articles like, how to train your grip strength. And it's not grip strength that's the indicator of mortality. Grip strength is an indicator of overall strength.
Right. Mhm.
And that's probably what's leading to mortality. And so, what I see with VO2 max, it's an indicator of our cardiorespiratory system, how well that works. But training for VO2 max is at the optimal way. So, just like training for grip strength, might not be the optimal way to live longer. I don't know if training for VO2 max is the optimal way of living longer. I think it's great. If people are going to decide I'm going to train for VO2 max or not train at all, go train for VO2 max.
Mhm.
But I think there might be, and just our backgrounds, with Pavel and things, um, VO2 max protocols are sort of like 4 minute, like, one of the famous ones is 4 minute intervals and 4 minutes of rest. Um, and it's a very glycolytic focused type of interval. to improve your VO2 max. I'm not sure if that's the protocol I want to do for longevity. I can improve my VO2 max sort of indirectly by doing shorter intervals, or other things that people do are long zone two type training. But I don't know if VO2 max is my main objective in life, just because it's correlated with longevity and research. I think building more type 2X muscle fibers, having explosive strength, those are important things. And then also having good mitochondrial health. So I'd rather do, be explosive. Pavel's talked about this before. You can find people who are 100 years old that walk miles a day collecting mushrooms and, like
Right.
have tons of endurance. But finding people who can, sprint 100 meters, under a certain amount of time, it's much limited. And my one friend, Brad Kearns, he's got the world record in the high jump at age 65-ish or so. And he's talking about at age 80, the high jump world record is basically jumping onto your bed, at a height
Wow.
that's about, on your bed. So like having those type 2 muscle fibers when we get older, I think is even more important. And so I'd rather like train, explosive type events as much as possible. So things like kettlebell swings, things like plyometrics, maybe when I was younger, would be great. I still can do plyometrics, but if somebody is worried more about injury, like I think a kettlebell swing is, very explosive and not as dangerous as something like a, plyometric. But you can build those type 2 muscle fibers. You can build your mitochondria really well. I'd rather do those type of things than, do these 4-minute intervals that are very glycolytic just to focus on that VO2 max number.
Yeah. Why is the literature just saying that like VO2 max is the optimal thing right now? Is that kind of the general consensus among a lot of research behind longevity?
I think the literature is saying VO2 max is correlated with longevity.
Okay. Mhm.
And then, the others are saying, therefore, we must train for, the highest VO2 max possible. I think that sort of jump and saying that the correlation is, the most important thing is, being done by others and sort of interpreting the literature. I think the research is pretty clear. VO2 max is associated with longer life, but I don't think that's necessarily optimal.
Yeah.
I think we can get there in multiple ways. And just because we can measure VO2 max, just like we can measure grip strength easy, doesn't mean that's the best way to train.
That's what I was wondering is because maybe VO2 max is just so easy to get a quick test on it and just gives you one number that it's like, okay, we can check that box off and say, okay, you're good for right now, but it's not actually telling the whole story.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the case. I mean, anything like if we could do a blood test, they would do a blood test, but doing something, measuring the density of type 2 muscle fibers in the thigh or something like that, where you have to take a biopsy, that's painful, difficult, complicated procedure that you're not going to get a lot of data from. So, I think we could look at other things, like that might be better measures, but they're just not easy to measure.
Right. It is interesting because I've heard that about grip strength, and it is there's a mortality, change that goes on when you increase your grip strength. But as you said, if you have good grip strength, it probably means that there's a bunch of other boxes that are getting checked at the same time. Like in order to have that, that means you're probably using your body, probably doing maybe some time under tension training. You're not just holding a stress ball and just squeezing it throughout the day and just
Mhm.
working on your grip strength. There's probably other correlations that are going on there at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't want to call anyone out, but like when I see a news article like, build your longevity by, grip strength exercises, it's like, oh my gosh, like you're just taking this correlation and running with it. And I kind of feel that way, that same gut reaction I have with VO2 max type training. I'm not saying it's worthless. I think there's some, I think grip strength training could be useful too, but I don't think that's our be all end all because it's easy to measure.
Yeah. In those types of things, when they're going over grip strength, it's like, what's the protocols that you're seeing that they're doing
I
out
can't,
there?
I can't even read it. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
I read the headline and it's like, oh, come on, no, that's not that's not the logic behind it. I mean, if you would read the research article, they're saying grip strength is a proxy for muscle strength, and so
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in my head, I'm just like, okay, like we're going to incorporate some farmer walks into what you're doing, which is going to hit a lot of other areas at the same time. We're probably going to do some sort of ballistic kettlebell swings, which is naturally going to build into your work. But what you mentioned with explosive strength and type 2 muscle fibers, like again, why is that? Why do you think that might be a more optimal goal than something like VO2 max or just like a simple type thing versus like grip strength?
I mean, I think so. I mean, if you kind of look at both of those combined, I mean, grip strength is sort of our your muscle mass, how much strength we have, and VO2 max is our cardiorespiratory fitness. If we are still explosive, and very few people have that sort of explosive strength, when they're older, but this, um, those type of things I think go together and kind of lead us to have a better longevity. So I would rather train, these things that I know I'm going to lose probably the easiest so that, I can keep as much of it as possible.
Mhm.
So, keeping my strength, keeping my explosive strength, especially, is vital to me because I feel like that's the easiest one for me to lose if I don't do things that are
Yeah.
explosive.
I read this thing recently that by the age of like 23, like that 90% of people will never sprint another day in their life of going out. It's like, I mean, it is kind of crazy when you think of it. Like 23, you got your literally whole life ahead of you, and you never are going to do anything explosive again during the rest of your life.
Yeah, that's an incredible stat. I'm gonna borrow that or steal that from you probably. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's incredible.
yeah. So what are some of the protocols that you think are the best for continuing to work on explosive strength, on type 2 muscle fibers that can help with this goal of longevity and health span and lifespan?
I think a lot of it depends on where the person's at. Like if let's say you've got that 23-year-old that's never sprinted again and they're 30, they might have the capacity to sprint again. But I'm not day one, I might not have them sprint. I think, building explosive strength, that in a safe way, building sort of those muscle patterns, that are safe, I think is the most important. So having, you know, like I think my first goal is not to get injured. So, I think finding safe things is what's most important. Um, what I do, I've been doing for years. I know kind of how to do these movements. I feel like I'm safe in these movements. I think for anybody else doing something explosively is, kind of a dangerous thing if they haven't done a lot of it. So I think building up to those explosive movements. But I do like a lot of course, surprise, surprise, kettlebell swings, like heavy kettlebell swings, explosive kettlebell swings. I've got a heavy bag, so I can kind of practice like a lot of explosive, punching. I'll do jump squats. I've been doing a lot of jump squats lately with a belt. So like I have a belted squat type of setup, and I can just sort of like just in a normal jump position and just kind of jump up with weight.
Mm,
And that sort of to me is a much safer. And like again, you have to have good squat patterns. But if you're practicing, just jumping, you can have the landing and sort of issues that might be affected by that. But like with jump squats, I can do it with weights. I can be very explosive. I'll do some, push-ups, like drop push-ups, where I sort of drop on. I'll go off of a box and drop down. So sort of like plyometric type
mm.
push-ups. But I try to do, a lot of explosive type of activities. I'm sure I'm forgetting some now, but in a safe manner, like as controlled as possible. Like a kettlebell swing, Verkhoshansky would, like I kind of liken it to his sort of drop jumps, his depth jumps. So a person would drop off of a 30-inch box, let's say, land on the ground, quickly rebound and jump up as high as possible. Um, with that type of movement, it's wonderful, but yet the person when they're landing has to land properly and also jump back up without causing injury, where a kettlebell swing you've got that weight coming back down that you have to reverse directions, and it's like your feet are planted, you're in a good position, and you're reversing that weight. And so it's a very much to me it's a similar movement to a depth jump,
Mhm.
where you're just kind of reversing that weight and kind of building those sort of neuromuscular connections as much as possible.
Yeah. So hint, do your kettlebell swings. So surprise, surprise, we're getting to that topic right there. So
Yeah.
with your squat jump, like with the belt jump, I'm curious about this. When you start adding weight and resistance, how do you approach increasing weight on that? Are you looking for like when do you know it's like a good weight to progress to and work with? Are you looking at your rep speed? Like, are you just kind of playing around with it? Like, what's your protocol or your thought process when you start adding weight to something like that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because I basically want sort of I don't leave the ground, but like you can hear the weight sort of like launch up and then
Mhm.
kind of land back down. And if I'm not fast enough to sort of launch the weights up and you kind of hear this clang, when they go back down, I know like I've not going fast enough. So it's not a fast squat. It's like I'm really trying to jump off the thing, but the weight is what's keeping me on the platform. But I hear that sort of clang, and I know that it seems silly, but when I'm making a lot of noise, I know I'm going fast enough.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fascinated with this idea of explosive strength because the right approach to what weight to use for the optimal benefit of it, I think is really interesting. I'm Antonio Scolante, when he's come on the podcast, has talked about a lot of the work he's done in USC with finding that like kind of the Goldilocks kettlebell for swings using a force plate. And because sometimes like just going heavier doesn't mean that you're building that strength. You have to kind of find the right approach to it. So I think it's an interesting way of how to get the feedback that you're looking for to optimize that without overloading it, which could either lead to injury or you're just not getting as much benefit from it.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, and with Pavel a few years ago, like we did some, force plate type stuff. We were looking at the push band, and unfortunately the company was purchased by Whoop and they don't make it anymore. But the push band was this accelerometer and it would give you, power curves. And it was like, you could figure out like, you try to go as fast as possible and like what kettlebell weight. And like we kind of devised a whole protocol and you'd, start with like a, 24 kilogram, 32, 40, and kind of like figure out which weight gave you the optimal uh, sort of explosive strength on that strength curve. And like I kind of wish they had, and maybe there are devices. I know there's some things that hook to barbells that will do it, but I can't find something that hooks to a kettlebell to kind of
Mhm.
figure out what that right explosive strength place is. But it's like you said, it's probably that Goldilocks spot, not too heavy where it's sort of grinding out a little bit, and not too much where it's just flying out of control. It's somewhere in between where you're really like putting everything into getting it to go fast. But
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that they discontinued the push band on that. That's a shame.
yeah, and they had it for like Whoop bought them, and I think it says on their website that they're working with larger organizations. So I'm hoping they're still working on it and that there'll be some sort of device available at some point in time. But yeah, they were doing some really great stuff.
Yeah. Why is it so beneficial to like find that Goldilocks bell in there? Is it because is it building something different than just more safety maybe and like kind of just being able to get a little bit more volume in? Like is there another factor that we're looking for of kind of finding that optimal weight?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm just basing it off sort of that strength curve, and we're just trying to find the most efficient spot where we're building that explosive strength, where we're not grinding it out and it's not too light, where we're not putting enough of our strength in it. So I think it's just the most efficient spot. But like if you don't know that perfect spot and you're grabbing a kettlebell that's a little too heavy, it's still going to build your explosive strength, but it might not be the most efficient way to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that's one of the biggest coaching things that I've tried to optimize really over the last year of working with people. Now more working more with people like in an online position, so I'm not in front of them as much. That attention to rep speed and when that changes is such a good external feedback of be like if with a press or with a swing, when you feel it physically start to slow down, that's a good indicator. Okay, pause for a sec, reset, rest, and then go back into the other one. It's a very like good just overall tip of just keeping that good technique and that good form with. And I just found myself utilizing it a lot more in just my own training of going into swings and going into snatches.
Yeah, and then again, maybe Push is listening, and we'll come back with the Push band if I whine enough about it. But like it was really great because you could see real time your graphs of power. And I remember, like doing 10 sets of 10 every minute on the minute and sending Pavel the data. And knowing I have to send Pavel this data, I'm not letting my power sort of like, subside at any point in this, 10 sets of 10, but like you could see your chart and like, oh, I got to go a little harder on this one. And that feedback was invaluable. Like, I think, having accelerometers aren't that complicated. I feel like, if we could do something like that, it would be outstanding just to give you that visual feedback. Like you got to go faster and you got to, put more power into it.
Yeah, exactly. Especially, and good another tip, send your information to Pavel and you'll make sure that you're doing everything
Yes,
in
exactly. Yeah.
the right way there. So when putting together like a training protocol, do you think is there a difference between a training protocol for longevity and then say train like a training protocol for a specific goal, maybe in a 2 month or 3 month focus that you have? What would be like the differentiations that you would look at?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. Like Peter Attia talks about, centenarian Olympics, and he kind of talks about, this whole idea, like what he wants to do in his last decade of life. And he's sort of calculated out, when he is 90, in his 90s or 80s, I forget which age group, his grandkids will be this age. And, he's kind of estimated these things he wants to do. So like picking his grandkids up, over his head, or, taking a piece of luggage, maybe this was mine, taking any type of luggage you bring on the plane and putting it into the overhead bin. So he's sort of training for those goals, 40 years later, where I kind of feel like I need something, I want to train in that manner, but also I need something a little bit like shorter term reinforcement. So I need some sort of competition, and something to sort of, push myself, but I still kind of train, this explosive strength type things. I'm still trying to, have good endurance, for, that I can do a snatch test, tomorrow if somebody asks me to do a snatch test type of thing. I'm always trying to keep that sort of general abilities. But like, for example, like there's this obstacle course that's near us, and there are 10 different events, and you've got to climb a rope 3 times as fast as possible, climb a wall 5 times, do all these like a ring traverse, all of these type of things. And so like I just sign up for that competition just so I have something to train for. Like the tactical strength challenge is another, great challenge to, just have something to train for. Where I'm building explosive strength and, but able to still train for something in the short term. But,
Yeah.
I kind of like, thinking about I need as much explosive power, as much of endurance, and like I'll kind of take those ratios and change them up a little bit depending what I'm training for.
Yeah, I appreciate the answer because I feel we can overcomplicate this aspect of training for longevity when a lot of it still comes down to if you're doing the consistent practices, like it's probably benefiting that down the road in some capacity. Optimal versus not, that's going to be subjective in probably many different ways, but that training for a specific goal and a target. I feel like in some ways we've lost that overall in the culture. Like it's like, yeah, training for something that's coming up in a couple months or a few months that you gotta, I refer to as the highway of strength, like put it into the left lane and go hard on it for a period of
Mhm.
time. I think, yeah, maybe it's not a long-term approach. You're not going to train like that forever. But I still think there's such a benefit to having that short-term challenge that's going to push you to the realms where you still have to get stronger. You're not just maintaining what you have. You still got to push a little bit.
Most definitely. Yeah. And I like my friend Brad Kearns, who's, a bit older, at age 80, I'm going to beat that world record. I think I can high jump into it better. I have to learn how to high jump a little bit better, but I think I'm going to get that record. So, um, but yeah, I'd love to kind of train for those type of things as I get older too. So.
Yeah. So what are some things that maybe you should avoid or maybe are overrated in terms of training if you're looking at it on a longevity approach?
I think again, I think the first thing I said, I try not to train where I'm going to get injured, because I think, injuries can really set people back. And like you said, the consistency is the key. So the more I can train consistently and do things, even if I'm not doing as much as I'd like, but I'm consistent, I think I'll be better off in the long term. So anything that I'm doing, I really think about, I can tell when I'm going to injure myself. Like I love to do, there's great Plan Strong program for pressing. I love doing that program, but my elbows just, fall apart. It's
Mhm.
just so many presses, like 200 presses, and like a lot in every week. So like 3 training sessions a week. And, there's a day where you're doing like 40, 50 presses above like 70% or so. And it's like that really jacks up my elbows. I'll do that. And sort of just kind of change the load a little bit and, adjust the volume into 4 days or, and make sure every rep is really good. So to me, avoiding injury is the most important thing. And when you can start to feel those things start to tweak, that's when I know I have to change my form or fix things up a little bit.
Yeah. How do you, what's your mechanism to like making sure that you don't get injured, like in a protocol standpoint, or as you said, so like something with the elbow, is that something that you feel like, okay, as soon as it's there, that's when you back off from there? Or do you kind of do some things to make sure you specifically avoid these things? What's your approach to making sure that you don't fall down that line too far?
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. I mean, I think mistakes are like sometimes our greatest way of learning things. So I've made a lot of mistakes. I know how I'm going to get injured and what things injure me. So like I do a lot of preventative type things. Like I got a massage gun, like I'll, run over my arms and my, shoulders if I'm going to do, some presses that day. So that kind of warms everything up. I've got, gosh, what is the name brand of the bands, but just some, like stretchy bands where, I'll do some like different, sort of smaller muscles in the shoulders to warm things up. I've got like a lot of, uh, upside down kettlebell presses. I do a lot with a barbell now to do one armed barbell presses. I feel like that really builds up my shoulder, sort of the smaller muscles in my shoulder. So a lot of one arm barbell stuff. Um, and, like with squats, I'll do like a lot of single leg stuff to kind of keep things in line. So, like, I've got a lot of preventative type of exercise to keep, my knees, my
Mhm.
joints in line, and my shoulders in line, and my elbows. But so I'm really trying to be preventative, and then I push where I can, in those type of things. So
Yeah. It's funny. It's hilarious to say, but I really only started taking warm-ups more seriously when I turned 40 in January and like
mhm.
started to feel it. It's like now, and every time I crack up, because I always had Pavel in my head, it's like you don't need to warm up that much, just like, get a couple things in a roll. I was like, well, I think that's an outlier approach a little bit more the more that I, go into practice and stuff. And now like taking more time into warm up, specifically with the small joints like the elbows and like the ankles and stuff like that. Those things that you get a little bit extra TLC on
Yep,
as just time goes on.
yep. And Pavel's point is kind of like the traditional warm up. You go run and then stretch for a little bit. I don't think that's necessarily optimal. Like I think you like you said, just start with some light weights, very intentional type movements, and then you can go heavy once sort of that neuromuscular system is ready to drive through things. So
Yeah.
I don't
What's
think Pavel
what
was ever advocating go right to a 400-pound deadlift, unless you're Andy Bolton, 400-pound deadlift maybe. But most everybody's not starting with that as their warm-up rate weight.
Yeah, no doubt. What's one arm barbell stuff? Tell me about that. What are you doing with the like one arm barbell work?
So that was thinking in one of Pavel's really real old books, Power to the People, maybe. He had that in there. And so you got to find the middle of the barbell and you grab it with one arm. You really have to, that's trains you to keep a really tight core. And the barbell wants to move in, all three different directions. So when you're pressing that barbell up, you have to be really tight and sort of like in line. And I think that I wrote an article about it on Strong First at some point in time. But I find that because the barbell's so long and it wants to go in so many different directions, that I have all of my shoulder stabilizers have to really be active to kind of press that barbell up.
Yeah. Do you find it more beneficial than like a bottom up kettlebell press?
I do. I think they're both beneficial. I like the barbell, and I'll do sometimes single barbell, like Turkish get-ups as
Mm.
well, because it's also that length, I think, kind of gives it that sort of, difficult part. It's building the grip strength, but also you really have to concentrate on keeping that centered. And when it's centered like that, like my elbows and joints are in line perfectly. So my forearm, stays in a nice straight line. The things that are going to screw up my elbows are probably when I don't have to be so careful. So if I have a, heavy kettlebell and I'm trying to press it, I'll do all kinds of weird things. My forearm gets sort of, in a wonky position trying to press it up. So with a barbell, I can't do those wonky things that I want to do.
Right. It really keeps you a lot more honest.
Yep.
Yeah. It's funny. I thought about this, Craig, about get-ups. I've had this thought and debate about how heavy you actually need to go with get-ups versus not. And it's like, from training for Sinister for so long and, now taking a little break, had a little back thing, but that heavy bell of just resting on the forearm can get super challenging. So I was almost like, would it be more beneficial if you want to keep increasing in weight to actually use a barbell, which is going to challenge the stability a lot more versus just keep increasing the kilos on the kettlebell versus versus the barbell.
Yeah. I mean, it's that, or you start to wear an armband, and then Pavel's going to make fun of you for wearing an armband. But so I would grab the barbell. But
Yeah, so it is because I think the Turkish get up. I mean, it's a great movement. I'm more resigned now to thinking that it's a great warm up and mobility exercise. That's something you really don't need to go too heavy on. I think if you're going to do a Sinister challenge and challenge yourself for something, absolutely for a short period of time. But the days of thinking you need to keep increasing and working on the get up, I think it's much just more risk versus reward than anything. It's the one movement of kettlebells that I've kind of had the back and forth with as much of everything. That and the bench press, I've kind of debated back and forth. But I think just the weight of the bell on the back of the arm is a lot more challenging for many people versus, versus other exercises.
yeah, I think I've like the liquid fish oil. I've likened Turkish get ups to the liquid fish oil. Like you just got to sort of down it and do it every once in a while. It's good for me. I know it's good for me, but yeah, I don't necessarily love Turkish get ups. But
Yeah. So you said you do heavy kettlebell swings. Do you incorporate snatches at all as far as ballistics?
I do once in a while. I think with my pressing and things, I tend to get I like to do heavier swings than I probably would use for snatches. And then my shoulder stuff I'm kind of doing with a lot more presses and things. So I don't do a ton of snatches.
Mhm.
And just I tend to wear lots of devices and taking off watches and things. But I kind of like just grabbing a heavy kettlebell and doing those. But
Yeah, it's something I love snatches. I think that's such a benefit to it, and the trajectory is a little bit different on it, but the heavy one hand swing as far as power production and that explosive strength, I think that has just a little bit more of a superiority than the other ballistics.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I've got a little bit of weird shoulder mobility stuff. So like, I can do snatches, but it's just feels better to do heavy swings and presses separate.
Yeah, no doubt. So you're doing something called a Misogi challenge, okay? I'm not going to ask you to go into the details of it because I know it's like Fight Club on here, but what is a Misogi challenge and why is this something that you think is like something personally for you that you deem important and maybe is a good thing for other people to do?
Yeah. So and I think we're going to have Michael Easter on your show, The Comfort Crisis. He wrote this book, and basically it's this challenge and other. It comes from a Japanese word, that's sort of like a ritual purification. So in this sense, it sort of means like taking up a difficult challenge, and so. Another way to think about it is to clean off the contamination caused by modern conveniences, I guess. So you really want to do something. There are kind of two rules to it: make it really hard and don't die in the process. So you want it to be something that where there's a high probability of failure, even if you execute it perfectly. And then what it does, it really teaches you for showing what your potential is, that you can do these type of things. So your goal is to come up with something that's really difficult. There's an example. I'm trying to think if it's in his book or if it's something else that I've heard. But they basically carried a rock, a big, heavy, like 85-pound rock around this island. So it was like a 3.1 miles around this island, underwater. They had like a couple of guys doing it. So one person would be grabbing the rock, walk on the bottom of the water. Another, and while the other person's breathing, the other person would dive down, grab the rock, walk, and kind of taking turns
Yeah.
over this. So that's a type of misogi. Kind of with this, it's really about sort of this internal process of realizing you can do these very difficult things, and it's not sort of a external validation type of thing. So like you said, it's you're not really supposed to talk about your misogi. It's just like you've got this knowledge in the back of your brain, like, hey, I can do this really difficult thing, and so it's more for you as a person internally than anything else.
I think it's such an interesting, concept and a power. Adding a water element to that second rule of don't die is definitely very interesting on there of grabbing that rock. But, I think it speaks to I like the aspect of kind of you keep it to yourself because I think, I've talked about this with goal setting before. And there's a lot of different things like some people say, like, tell everybody your goal so you have a bunch of accountability outside of it. But I kind of went on the reverse of it, of being like, keep your important goals to yourselves first. It's like not everybody needs to give you feedback on it, or you need to have it. And if you are like seeking external feedback to the goal for yourself, well, maybe you need to like check the importance of it there, because if somebody says something that's maybe not so comforting or supportive and that throws you off, well, that says a lot more about you and where your process is versus what that person is saying. So when you said that, I thought that was like really interesting. Have you done any of these before, or is this the first one that you're jumping into?
No, I did one, and yeah, it was. There were times where like, and mine, I won't say too much about it, but it was like more the cold than anything else, and so it wasn't like a water. I mean, there was heights and cold, and like, am I going to survive this?
Yeah.
Can I complete this type of thing? So it's yeah, and it's life changing, and so it kind of cleans off the feeling of the day to day, and and it kind of helped me in some different life transitions, and kind of
Yeah.
like changed the way I look at my world. So
Yeah. How do you decide what challenge that you want to do? Is there a specific kind of process, or is it just kind of like, ooh, that seems interesting and I'm scared shitless of that? So,
yeah, no, it was kind of that. I mean, I've got plenty of things where I'm scared shitless of. So I've got a long list of things I'm scared of, but like this was something like I've had in my mind for years, and just like, this is the time to do it.
yeah. That's such a, what was that? What's the day like when you approach that challenge? Like, was it like a fear like, holy shit, am I going to do this? Or was it more of like, as soon as you're in it, like, well, I'm in it now, might as well just go after it.
Yeah, and mine kind of took some time. It wasn't like a one day type of thing. So it yeah, it's there's a bit of like a determination. Like I spent some money. I putting myself out there. I'm don't want to fail for myself. I don't want to fail. Like, I want, I like, again, it's not external validation, but, with my daughter, like anything that I can do to kind of show her, sort of perseverance and anti-fragility. I like to, show those type of things. I'm not going to fail. And, like, so I have those sort of type of things, like, if, there's times certainly where you feel like, I can just leave now, and I don't have to tell anybody about this. I didn't bring it up beforehand, that I don't have any accountability, but like, it's you're only cheating yourself in that situation. So
Yeah. Do you know a guy named Ashley Kane? Have you heard of him?
I've heard the name. I'm trying to. I don't know him personally. No.
Yeah, he's an English guy. I think he was a pretty good soccer player, European football player, but I heard him on a podcast because he talked about he had a daughter who, got sick and passed away, I think at like 3 years old, and went through the whole story. But now like his whole life is dedicated to incredibly challenging endurance events. Like I think he just did some sort of like canoe ride through like the Arctic, where I think like one person's ever done it and survived and stuff like that. And like the common thing that he was talking about was, people asked him, was like, why do this? Like, I mean, it's an easy question to ask, like, it's like, why do something so dangerous? And his whole thing was like, it taps into the spiritual connection of it, actually feels his daughter in this. So like I'm sorry, it's not just a physical challenge or even a mental challenge. There's probably a spiritual component, however you view that in your life, of doing something so challenging that, yeah, there might be a good chance that this isn't going to go well or the way that you have, but if you do, you're going to be on the other side of it, and it's going to be something, really fulfilling for you.
Yeah, yep. Yeah. Yeah, and I think of like, I mean, one of my side jobs is I do treatment for people with anxiety disorders. And, for them, the thing that we do mostly is for people to face their fears. And so if I'm afraid to face my fears, like how can I be, helping you face your fears? So like anytime I feel like this sort of discomfort, I know I have to do it. And so
Mhm.
like we have this motto with anxiety disorders, if it feels bad, do it. Like that's that sort of mindset, like that you really think you can, that I needed to do this for me, to prove it to my daughter, and also that I can stand up to people and say, "Hey, you've got to do this tough thing in your life." I know how difficult it can be, but I'm not going to ask you to do something that I'm not going to be willing to do.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm curious about that with your work with anxiety disorders and like the common things that um people are maybe lacking at that, that come in and seek your help. Because oftentimes we see anxiety as a mental thing that's going on. But I always wonder, is it something that physical work and help can help that even more than just focusing on like mental well-being? Have you seen that at all?
I'm smiling because like this was sort of like my dissertation and like my a lot of my research has been on this sort of like this way we process information. And so our reptilian brains, process information, very quickly. So I'll give you an example of social anxiety. So somebody with social anxiety walks into a room, they're quickly scanning the room, finding any sort of face that looks angry, disgusted, showing contempt, or even neutral faces they'll sometimes latch onto, like that person looks angry almost. That face causes like through the visual tract goes right to the amygdala, causes a fight or flight type of response, where the person's already starting to sweat before a thought even comes to mind, that this person doesn't like me. So, we can measure this. We've measured this in the lab quite often. We have an eye tracker. We know what they look at. We measure their physiological reaction. They start to have a sweat response. Their heart rate starts to change. All of these things happen, even if we've shown them subliminal pictures of angry faces, these things happen. So they don't even know, they haven't seen it long enough to even say what they saw, but their body's reacting very quickly. And so, like to me, anxiety disorders is all about sort of our reptilian brain is telling us this is dangerous, and then our thought process just kind of adds to that on top of it. So to me, the best treatment for it is to show the reptilian brain this is not dangerous. So like with social anxiety, we have people go into like places and like, one of my favorite, I take a lot of these from Impractical Jokers, but they walk up to people and it's like, don't I know you from someplace? And, like they have to have a conversation with somebody. It's like, I know you from someplace. And they're getting like a lot of looks of contempt or anger. Most people are generally pretty nice, but sometimes it doesn't work. Like, why are you talking to me? Stop
Right.
bothering me. What are you trying to trick me out of? What are you asking for money? Like they have all of these sort of like, sort of responses that they're very afraid of. But when they survive those situations, like their physiology sort of changes. And so we have them do task after task doing that, and they learn not to be afraid of things. So, some other like with social anxiety, like we have people, go in the store and, jumping jacks in the store, start lifting milk jugs. I got to get my training in today. Do all kinds of weird things and get weird looks from people, and that kind of retrains their physiology. And to me, that's the most powerful change mechanism in anxiety disorders.
That's so fascinating that, you see immediately like the angry face and all of a sudden it's triggering all these other things. Is it the same response like if they see somebody who's like smiling or like a positive thing? Like is it a different response or is it a lesser response versus the
So
other?
yeah, and so here's what we found like in the eye tracker is people with social anxiety are looking for threat. So if you show them a group of pictures, they find the threatening faces and they don't find the smiling faces, where most people will find the smiling faces. So they're looking for threats. So they're not often seeing the smiling face as much because they're scanning the room looking for, is anybody not liking me? Um, and if everybody's smiling, then yeah, they'll feel that normal response. But
But they'll find that one frown and link into that.
exactly, yep. Or if somebody, has like gas and just, like holding it in and
Yeah.
like burps and like, oh, what's wrong with that? Like that person hates me, all of a sudden, their physiological reaction almost. So.
Yeah, that's so that is fascinating to me on that of the response. 'Cause anxiety, because anxiety is a weird word. It's a fickle bitch, and it's like I think it's so different from person to person around there. But I had this debate for a bit, Craig, with people of like what comes first, like a strong body versus a strong mind, and it's like having a strong mental health. I think is super important, and there's a million directions you can go with that, but if you're not doing something physical at that time and actually using your body, oftentimes if you just work the physical side, it's going to flow downstream into helping the mental side a lot more. So like you said, like doing jumping jacks like in the middle of a supermarket, like just even getting your body aligned with it is probably so much more beneficial than just going in and just trying to have like a mental conversation or telling yourself to stay calm.
Exactly. Yeah, that the mental system comes second. I mean,
Mhm.
you can't talk like when you have an emotional response, it's so strong, and the mental part can't really often talk us out of our emotions. We feel those things. They're meant to guide us, and so they're, I liken it to like software almost. Our emotional system is on like version, what's the iPhone 16? We're on version 16 of our emotion system. Our cognitive system's on the beta version still. Like it's there. It works pretty well. Like it's almost ready to go in production, but it's not taking over the full operating system of our brain. Our emotions, guide us through most of our world. And what you said about the physical piece, we have a meta-analysis that's coming out soon, looking at sort of the benefits of different types of exercise, like strength and cardio, on depression, and the second one is anxiety disorders. It's as powerful of a treatment as it's more powerful than sort of SSRIs. It's more powerful than, it's as about as powerful as like sort of traditional CBT type treatment. Um, I think physical movement is so important to our mental states as well. Like, I mean, I prescribe, these exposures, but I also like, tell me about what you're doing for physical activities, and I find like people change so much when they just start becoming more physical in their life.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I've seen some of that research and I'm so pumped that that information is coming out on physical exercise and training and what it can do for treating things like depression and anxiety and getting it versus SSRIs. I think such a big shift in what we're doing. And one of the things with doing hard things is the last thing I wanted to really ask you about, but talking about the specific spot in the brain, which is it's called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, which has now gotten a lot of traction. I think Huberman brought it up on a podcast, and this AMC and doing hard things actually makes this part bigger in the brain. But what is actually the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, and what is its purpose in our brain and in our body?
Yeah, if I can do a little neuroanatomy, I'll try to make it as simple as possible. And so sometimes if you see like a brain and somebody's holding a brain, you see the two hemispheres. And if they were to take their thumbs and kind of pull the two hemispheres apart a little bit, there's this like thick white, sort of connectors that go between the two hemispheres. And that's the thick white piece is the corpus callosum, and that's what connects the hemispheres and how your two hemispheres communicate with each other. The anterior cingulate cortex is right above that. And it's a place where you kind of bring in a lot of emotional information. So the very front of that is this area that some scientists have called it like well, you said shit earlier. I guess I can say that on air. The oh shit network. And it's this area that kind of like realizes when there's danger in the world. And like, I think of it as like when I walk away from my car and I have my key fob in my hand, it's like, oh shit, did I lock the car? And I have this sort of gut reaction, something's not right. And so then maybe I'll walk back to the car and double check and lock it. But for people with anxiety disorders, that front part, that anterior cingulate cortex, the very front of that, is this sort of, oh shit network. This is where we sort of weigh in. It's our gut reaction that things are not so good. It tells us, there's danger in the world. So right behind that is that sort of anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And that's kind of like it brings in the risk piece. It kind of like weighs the sort of risk. And what it does is basically helps people sort of like decide that, that they can get over that risk. And so there's this really neat study with patients with epilepsy. And what they do with patients with epilepsy, they try to probe the brain to figure out where the seizure starts. And when they probe that area, the people with epilepsy kind of described it, and I'm going to actually just read this. So this first patient, he used an analogy to explain his feelings. He reported that he felt as if he were driving a car into a storm, like you're headed towards a storm that's on the other side, maybe a couple miles away, and you've got to get across the hill, and all of a sudden you're sitting there going, how am I going to get over that? And um, and then all of a sudden you're over it. It was more like a positive thing, like push harder, push harder, push harder to try and get through that. Um, so he basically just a probe kind of touched that area of the brain, and it's like this sort of like you can do this type of thing, So it's taking that risk, something's wrong, and you can get past it. And then the other patient with epilepsy said, something it's like something negative was going to happen, but simultaneously knowing that he had to fight to make it through and not give up. And like it's kind of a really neat area. And like you said, the more that we sort of work on this area, and then like the Misogi type challenge is, a great example of that. Like you're kind of building up. And I thought about this a little bit on my Misogi. It's like, yep, I'm building my anterior
Yeah,
mid-cingulate
no
cortex
doubt.
right now. Only I feel like only I would say that and it would actually motivate me. But like it's like you're building that area. And like I think, David Goggins is a great example of like
Mm.
I would love to scan his brain and like to see, how that area, like give him challenging things and see, how that area lights up compared to other people. And, I think we can really build that area. And so the more difficult things we do, the more we realize we can handle things. And that's what I see with my people with anxiety disorders is like with an anxiety disorder, you kind of shy away from the world and you start to build a bubble around yourself. Like I'm going to be safe in this bubble. But then when we break out of that bubble and we do this one exposure and then we do another exposure and another, they're kind of building this area is what I kind of imagine. And they feel like I can do this, going into and talking to somebody that's, don't I know you? Like they can handle like talking to a regular person and asking a person out on a date because they did these extreme things. They know they can handle things, and I think they're kind of building this area. So that's also why it's appealing to me, just because of my work with anxiety disorders.
I think it's so fascinating, Craig, because this topic, for oftentimes we know like, oh, if you do hard things, like you build, we call it resilience or whatever. But I think for a while we always thought of it as like, oh, this person's just got a really strong mind or resilience. Or it's like you watch The Last Dance with Michael Jordan and it's like he's just the clutch gene, right? It's like, oh,
Hmm.
some people just have it and some people don't. It's like, no, this is actually coming out that this is something that you can actually build and build upon. There's physiologically things that are going on to build it. It's not just a good feeling of, well, I did it before, maybe I can do it again. No, you can actually physically make these changes within your neurology and within your body that it holds with you. So hearing about this work with the AMC and doing something like a Misogi challenge, which is something so challenging that it's really going to push you to that threshold, I think is such a positive, not just on the physical side, but as you talked about with the anxiety disorders, the psychological side and the mental side as well. So, um,
I liken it to like people ask kids or even adults, who do you want to be as a superhero? And you know I wanted to be Clark Kent. I wanted to be this mild mannered type of person, but underneath know that I can do these super things. And like that's what I liken it to is like you walk through the world with a lot more confidence. And like we both know Eric Frohart, quite well, former Navy SEAL, and we see him. He's got a different vibe to him. Like, somebody once went into this, gas station with him, and it was like a kind of like a seemed a little bit dangerous. And Eric just was walking in, calm as can be, and he's got a little bit of like, I know I can handle myself if something happened. And it's not like a fake confidence. It's there's a real confidence there, and I think that this is what this is kind of building. This real confidence that you can handle things.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I want it to be Wolverine, and have the rage. So it's to each his own.
I love that. Yep, yep.
Yeah. Craig, dude, thank you so much again for coming on. I always learn so much from you every time we get a chance to chat. And for you to take some time here, I'm really grateful. So thank you.
My pleasure. It's always great to talk with you.
No doubt. Till next time, I'm sure we're going to be doing a round 4 here soon. So
glad I made it to another round.
No doubt. Good luck with the Misogi. I know you'll absolutely crush it. Have fun with it. But yeah, till next time, man.
Talk to you soon. Yep.
Awesome. Listeners, thank you so much. I'll catch you guys on the next one. All right. Peace.